Hello everyone! I took a bit of a hiatus from YouTube in order to work on the sequel to my novel Holocene. I'm over 20,000 words in, plus I've started a bit on the third, so I'm making progress. I do plan to get back to my Quantum Leap reviews, but time really hasn't been on my side lately. Between kids, dog, and the fact that my day job has started making me come back to the office, which consumes a lot of my time and energy, it's been a rough summer. As my number of subscribers slowly climbed, I started looking at my YouTube analytics. Turns out my Quantum Leap reviews weren't all that popular. In fact, my most watched video is an animated parody of the Duck Song. If you haven't checked it out, it's a good waste of 19 seconds of your time, and it's got tens of thousands of more views than my second most popular video. The takeaway is that I should do more animation. Now, I don't really consider myself an artist. It's not my day job nor a serious hobby or anything, but as a developer I've created some pretty neat things art-wise, like this article on Code Project back in 2016 for a Windows-based animation system called Vash, which I used to create my first animated short on YouTube called Catch. Or in 2018, the website Drawn, which is a social artwork/animation website where people can create, share, and like some amazing stuff all in their browser. Like seriously, check it out! I wrote this website and I can't fathom how some of these people create the art they do with it. And I'm a bit of a celebrity there. Like, fan art exists of me, which is probably one of the strangest outcomes of me creating the site. I also created the Dino song on Drawn and eventually put it up on YouTube. Now, a few months ago, I had an idea for a new animated short. I actually scripted it, recorded it, and mixed the audio, and all 49 seconds of it was ready to be animated. There was one problem. I didn't have the animation system I needed to do this. I don't have access to expensive tools like Adobe Animate. The free software that's out there is kinda clunky and watermarks the crap out of everything. Drawn is more for people who like drawing frame by frame, and my original Vash project is 7 years old and would need lots of retooling. But web browsers have come a long way since 2016. You can create zip files and MP4 files and mix audio all within the browser on the client side. I already have knowledge of constructing keyframed animation projects, like Vash, and fancy web-based UIs like Drawn, and I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do from both. So around June 19th, 2023, I decided to create a new project designed to be the animation tool that would best allow me to create animated shorts the way I want to. It would be web-based, Node.js powered, and be written in raw HTML/CSS/JavaScript, primarily using modules with only Bootstrap and jQuery as a base. It would also be a single-page application, and unlike Drawn, there'd be no social aspect to it. And I decided to call it Vash because I like the name. By June 21st, I had a rough layout of the editor screen and UI scaffolded. I then utilized Clipper.js to allow me to create and merge simple shapes to create more complex shapes. As I wrote it, I realized I was building a pretty cool tool, and it would be something that I could share with others. So by the 29th, I had a very simple splash screen set up and had multiple objects on different layers rendering with their adjustable properties. Like any project that you start from scratch, you make mistakes and you learn from them, and I saw several shortcomings in my design that would have to be refactored. I started making a list, but pressed on ahead. Adding basic tweening to animations was straightforward, but I realized that the way I allowed complex shapes to be constructed would permit me to animate the subshapes, allowing for cool effects like this. And unlike Drawn, which only records brushstrokes, Vash would allow you to mix raster images with your vector artwork. In this example, I drag an image file onto the web page where it gets loaded into the project, and remember that this is all on the client side here, there's no talking to the server. Then I can set it as the fill pattern for my composite shape. Cool stuff! Now, by itself, these features aren't that interesting or special. What makes Vash cool is that when you create a clip, which is a basic animation object in Vash, you can have several animation sequences associated with it, and you can include clips in the timeline of other clips. So take an eyeball, for example. You can have one clip that consists of an iris and a pupil, and an animation sequence for each emotional state of the eye. Now you can reuse that clip twice on a person's face to give them two eyes, and you can keyframe which sequence you want each eye to have individually. The really cool thing is that Vash tweens between sequences, so the eye doesn't just jump from sus to mad, but actually tweens between those states based on how far apart the keyframes are on the consuming clip. I also added color tweening and the ability to paste raster images and text directly into the timeline, which is a feature I find sorely lacking in a lot of animation programs. This was now almost at the 1-month mark since I started work on Vash, and I had a bit of an epiphany. My model already consisted of a hierarchy of entities, but I hadn't fully leaned into it. My composite shape consisted of the shape itself, and all the pieces were its children, but only one level deep. I realized that if I allowed the children to be nested amongst themselves, I could simulate a very simple form of rigging without having to create a proper skeleton and rigging system. So I refactored the code, and by July 14th, I could create a simple limb with pieces that I could rotate. I've used Daz 3D before, and I really like how every joint in a character is a human-friendly property that adjusts the underlying transformation. In Vash, I want to be able to do the same thing. I want to create a simple arm clip that can be reused, but I'd only care about the properties that make the arm move, like rotate at the shoulder, bend at the elbow, etc. Now, if you've been paying attention to the ever-evolving properties panel on the right, you'll notice there are a ton of properties that don't really matter with respect to animating an arm. So I prototyped out the rough ability to expose individual values of components of a clip to other clips that consume them. Thus, in this example, I have an elbow bend property that now shows up on the arm clip when you include it in another clip. This was July 17th. It had been a month of development, and I took all the features I had written until this point and created a short clip of one person walking past an identical, taller person. I had improved the exposed properties feature so that they showed up alongside the clip's other properties, and added the ability to group exposed properties together, so the character's head clip has an eyes left-right property that sets the left-right properties of the two eye clips inside it, so they can move in tandem. With my little animation complete, I could now turn to exporting it to MP4. I had already made the animation system modular enough to render any frame into whatever context I wished, and the FFmpeg port to JavaScript worked beautifully. It took me less than a day to prototype the feature to export the animation to high-def MP4, ready for YouTube. Oh, wait, let me fix that. There we go. YouTube ready. Not bad for just 1 month of working during my lunch hours and evenings, foregoing a lot of sleep, of course. So that's where you'd think this story kind of ends, but in fact it was just the beginning. Upon reaching this milestone, I went back to the list of things I had been creating that I felt were wrong with Vash. When I work through problems, I write little stories with myself where I argue how best to solve them and what problems I'd encounter depending on the chosen solutions. I ultimately realized that Vash could do a lot more if I rethought a good chunk of it and really leaned into the entity component model. So I started rebuilding most of the code behind the entity and components. It took several days before I was able to get it working to the point that I could export a simple animation again. But it was worth it. With my refactored code, I was able to create a path tool that allows you to create editable paths with selectable points, and I could rapidly develop new components that could be easily added to any entity, such as a spring component that you could add to a point to make it oscillate whenever the parent object is moved. What would you use this for? Well, you could add some dynamic properties to something like hair as a character moves around. Springs aren't quite working yet, I'm missing some math, but I'll get there. With the new refactor done almost 2 months after I started Vash, I could start designing the more complex characters I'd need for my 49-second short that kicked off this whole adventure. I also deep dove into HTML5 canvas properties and realized that I had access to features like blur, so I could whip up a blur component in a few minutes and then do cool effects like rack of focus. By August 16th, I had enough animation done that the first line of dialogue had animation to go with it.
It looks like we're unable to resolve our disagreement peacefully.
I then added the first support for virtual cameras. The idea is you can specify a camera that renders to a specific part of the viewport, but looks at a different area of the infinite canvas, and you can have as many of them as you'd like. Then when the scene is rendered, it only shows what the cameras see. And like everything else in Drawn, all the properties of cameras can be animated, so I could do cool effects like this. At the time of this writing, I'm continuing to work on my animated short, which is called The Duel, and I continue to make improvements to Drawn, be it the ability to quickly specify a subsection of the timeline to loop over when you're working on syncing up animations to audio, or the ability to specify markers and jump to them quickly. There's still a lot to do, but I'm definitely in the 20% of the 80-20 rule, and I'd like to release it for others to use as well. I put a lot into this, so my thoughts are that there will be a free version that has limitations and watermarks, and a full paid version without limitations. But for now, I'd be looking for some alpha and beta testers once I get this ready to put up on a server somewhere. If you're an animator and interested in being an alpha or beta tester, drop me a line at the email address on the screen. I'll make a list and reach out to you when I've started rolling it out. If you're interested in Drawn or the original Vash article on Code Project, there are links in the description. I hope to be posting the duel soon, but in the meantime, take care of each other, and as always, I'll see you in the future.